Welcome to Sounds of Resistance channel. Russian President Vladimir Putin's plan for the invasion of Ukraine is not going as Putin thought at the beginning of the year. Ukrainian forces took the war to a different level thanks to the M142 high-motion artillery rocket systems and AGM-88 high-speed anti-radiation missiles supplied by the United States. With the heroic Ukrainian army's offensive in Kharkiv, Donbas, and now Kherson, the Russian army is completely cornered in Ukraine, and now Russian FSB agents are evacuating civilians, Russian officers and important officials, especially in Kherson. As thousands flee from Kherson, all of Vladimir Putin's annexation and occupation plans collapse. While the Russian commanders admit that they are cornered in Kherson and that the situation is very difficult for the Russian army, the so-called officials appointed by the Kremlin are trying to escape from the region by opposing Putin. Vladimir Putin was planning to overthrow the Kiev government established by Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky in February 2022 and to appoint a Russian-backed person to head in Ukraine. When the date showed May 2022, due to the solid defense of the Ukrainian forces, Putin had to change his plans. As of May 2022, for a while, Putin was considering annexing the temporarily occupied Ukrainian lands, as he did in the Crimea in 2014, with fake referendums. By May, Russian forces were in control of almost 50% of Ukraine. In September 2022, the Ukrainian forces seized the areas temporarily occupied by the Russians during the Ukrainian counteroffensive, which is a new phase of the war, causing Putin's plans to fail. Ukrainian forces regained 70% of the Russian-dominated areas by counterattacks, and in this way, Ukrainian forces prevented the annexation by referendum of parts of Kherson, Zaporizhia, Luhansk, and Donetsk, including the whole of Kharkiv. Russian soldiers and officials in the annexed areas are extremely nervous as the Ukrainian forces have been successful in their operations throughout September. Especially the Russians in the Kherson region are thinking of saving lives by leaving the region before the operations of the Ukrainian forces. At present, a great despair prevails among the Russian forces in the Kherson region. The Russians in the Kherson region only think about how to escape. Vladimir Saldo, the Russian-administered leader of the Kherson region in southern Ukraine, demanded to evacuate the Russians in the region, citing daily rocket attacks by the advancing Ukrainian forces. The Russian security service has started to create evacuation plans to evacuate families of Russian officers from Ukraine. It is known that the evacuation plans were received by employees of Russian special services in all temporarily occupied territories, especially in the Crimea, where a larger number of officers were stationed. Agents of the Russian security service began to leave the temporarily occupied areas of Ukraine, families of Russian-backed oppressive officers and high-ranking military leaders. Real estate in the temporarily occupied Crimea was quickly sold, and Russian FSB agents urgently evacuated the families of officers from Kherson. At the same time, Russian-backed leader Vladimir Saldo stated that Russians in the region should go to Russia and save themselves. Saldo asked Kremlin for help to make this happen. He stated in Saldo's request that Russian Deputy Prime Minister Marat Kushnulin found it appropriate to make this move on state television. Russian officials accuse Ukrainian forces of targeting their own civilians. However, the Ukrainian forces want to end the Russian presence in the annexed regions by targeting only the trenches of the Russian forces with the modern weapons they use and high-precision attacks. Ukrainian troops are advancing step by step toward the regional capital city of Kherson, retaking parts of northwestern Kherson after Vladimir Putin's declaration of annexation. Mr. Kushnulin, who is in charge of southern Russia and Crimea, emphasized that the Kremlin government has decided to organize assistance for departure of Russian troops in the Kherson region to other parts of the country under the Ukrainian attacks. Governor Vasily Golubev stated that senior military officials from Kherson went to the Rostov region of Russia. Kyiv uses the US-supplied HIMARS rocket systems, among other weapons, to great effect. Ukrainian forces targeted key Russian military targets and threatened to destroy a large part of the occupying forces on the western bank of the Dnipro River. The significance of the Kherson region for Russian forces is that it is the only regional capital that Russian forces have captured since the start of the invasion of Moscow on February 24. The Ukrainian military does not comment on the advance of its troops in the Kherson region, which borders the southern Ukrainian peninsula of Crimea, which was annexed by Vladimir Putin in 2014. Russian forces are launching missile attacks all over Ukraine in order to maintain their presence in the Kherson region. All of Ukraine has been on airstrike alert for some time now. Russian missile attacks on energy and military targets in the Kyiv region and Lviv in the west were reported by the Ukrainian military authorities. Ukrainian authorities show that 2 people were killed in the bombardment of the southern city of Mykolaiv, and heartbreaking footage showed a young boy being rescued from the rubble of a house destroyed by the Russian attack. The young boy who was taken out under the rubble could not be saved despite all the interventions. Mr. Saldo noted that many Russian military presences in the region, including the 2 major cities of the Kherson region, Kherson and Nova Kakhovka, are now under daily rocket attacks by Ukrainian troops. Saldo underlined that the attacks of the Ukrainian forces caused great damage to the Russian forces, especially to Russian troops on the west bank of the Dnipro River. Seeing that the counterattacks of the Ukrainian forces were successful, Russian President Vladimir Putin made a fraudulent referendum on the regions under the control of the Russian forces with a quick referendum decision. According to the results of the so-called referendum, it is stated that 85% of the civilian population in the Russian-occupied areas want to join Russia. Referring to the results of this so-called referendum, Russian President Vladimir Putin announced at the beginning of October that he had annexed 4 regions of Ukraine. But United Nations, United States, and Ukrainian officials described these referendums as fraudulent and illegal. The United Nations Assembly's condemnation decision was supported by 143 countries, while 35 countries, including China and India, abstained. Besides Russia, 4 other countries rejected the decision. These countries are Belarus, North Korea, Syria, and Nicaragua. The G7 countries, which include Germany, the United States, the United Kingdom, Italy, France, Japan, and Canada, declared that Russian-controlled referendums illegal and promised to impose more sanctions if Moscow implements the annexation. While the G7 countries are increasing sanctions, Ukrainian forces continue their attacks on Russian-occupied areas despite their annexation decisions. Ukraine is putting incredible pressure on the Russian military presence in Kherson. This week, Ukrainian heroes have completely cornered the Russian presence in Kherson with an army of 60,000 soldiers. At the moment, Russian officials, civilians, and all the people in the region are forced to evacuate in Kherson. The Kremlin government made this move after Ukrainian forces liberated a number of settlements in southern Ukraine. At the same time, it is predicted that Ukrainian forces will soon launch attacks against the Luhansk region and recapture the region from Russian forces. The Russian government fears that these moves will materialize. To be notified of new videos, please do not forget to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications. Thank you for watching us.